So I had a pretty interesting experience. This is not a well-defined experience, but it was unique, so I'm going to talk about it. So I was in an astral projection in a pretty dull area, possibly a void, and I involuntarily went to a different body. It just happened out of nowhere. And this new body is completely foreign to me. It seemed to have access to lots of that white light, and I was just using it to create things in this generic building that I was in, and I was flying around rapidly, just moving through the halls and not really trying to interact with any of the beings. None of them had that signature that tells me that they're intelligent. Like, they didn't feel like intelligent beings individually, so I just didn't really feel the need to try to interact with them. And out of nowhere, this giant being accosts me, and he or it is like 100 times bigger than me, and it yells at me, and it says that I'm wasting the body's potential and I'm not using it properly, and it booted me out of that body, and I went back to my astral body. And I thought about it for a second in my astral body, and I initially thought that this being was just imposing dogma, unintelligible dogma on me, and it wasn't anything that I should concern myself with. And it was kind of concerning how it could boot me out of the body like that, but other than that, I didn't really feel like I should be concerned about this being and what it's trying to tell me. So I went back to this body again, and I do my usual thing, just flying around, trying to use the energy to create things and experimenting, and I get booted again by this giant being. And the third time around, I decided that I'm going to try to interact with some of these entities and see what it's all about. And I started to interact with these entities that had the same type of body, and I noticed that all these entities are very synchronized with each other. They're very interconnected. They didn't have a lot of intelligence individually, but as a whole, they had tons of intelligence. This time around, I didn't get booted out of the body by that one giant being. So I was interacting with this one being, and it seemed to have a gender, it seemed female, and she said that if I'm going to use the body, I have to continue to use it to interact with entities. That's what it's for. I have to use it for the good of the swarm, or the good of the group. And then I found another being to interact with. I introduced myself to this being, and I told it that I was human, and the response was pretty negative. It said something like, "Oh, you're one of those beings." That's what the feeling was when it responded. And then I asked it what it was, and it said a bit about itself, but I could only gather that it was yellow and black. And then shortly after, I woke out of that experience, and some of these beings came with me to my physical body, and they were like moving around in my subtle body. It felt like astral insects, and they were just stimulating the subtle body. It was a positive effect, and they were all communicating with me, but they weren't communicating with me individually. They all had a single voice, or so it sounded. Beforehand, I sent them a note summarizing what the human race is all about before we came back to my body. And this collective voice said, while they were traveling around in my subtle body, they said that they wanted to know about cell phones. And I found this very odd. I was like, okay, I'll show you what these cell phones are all about. I just entered sleep and then created a dream environment where I was using a cell phone and hoped that they would see it. I didn't feel them anymore when I entered the dream. And that was the end of that experience. So throughout this entire experience, I felt that these beings were completely immaterial. But they could be material beings. They might be bees, because they had that swarm intelligence going on. And that one being said that they were yellow and black, and they were asking about cell phones, which obviously messes with their ability to navigate. So I found it all pretty interesting how that all added up. So that's it for that experience. See you next time.